A young nurse tended to a comatose millionaire, and when he unexpectedly awoke, something extraordinary occurred. The fluorescent lights in Westbridge Private Health Hospital buzzed softly as Emily Carter navigated the immaculate white corridors. She had been a nurse there for nearly 2 years, but today felt different. When she received the unexpected call to Dr. Thompson's office, the head of neurology, a peculiar sensation settled in her chest. Had she made a mistake? Was she being reassigned? She took a deep breath before knocking on the polished mahogany door. "Come in," came the response. Stepping inside, she found Dr. Thompson standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, his usual sharp gaze fixed on the city skyline. His office smelled of sterile antiseptic and expensive leather, and the atmosphere was heavier than usual. "Emily," he said, finally turned to her. His voice was measured and serious. "We have a patient who requires special care, but this job is not for the faint-hearted." Emily's brows furrowed. "Not for the faint-hearted? What kind of patient?" she asked cautiously. Dr. Thompson studied her for a moment before gesturing toward a thick medical file on his desk. "Lucas Grant," he said. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Lucas Grant. The Lucas Grant. Even if she hadn't recognized the name immediately, the cover of the file said it all. A black-and-white newspaper clipping of a horrific car crash. A year ago, the youngest billionaire in the city had been in a devastating accident. His sports car had veered off a bridge in the middle of the night, leaving him in a coma ever since. His name had once dominated headlines. Lucas Grant, the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Grant Enterprises, the man who built an empire at just 32. Now, he was nothing more than a ghost trapped in his own body. "His family rarely visits," Dr. Thompson continued, "and most of the medical staff simply do their rounds out of obligation. But Lucas Grant needs someone dedicated, someone who will actually care." Emily bit her lip. She could hear the hesitation in his voice. "And you think that someone is me?" Dr. Thompson nodded. "I do." Emily took a slow breath. It was a daunting task, taking care of a man who might never wake up, a man whose wealth and power once dictated the lives of thousands. But deep down, she knew her answer before she even spoke. "I'll do it." Dr. Thompson's lips pressed into a thin line, but there was a glint of approval in his eyes. "Good. Your shift starts tonight." The private suite on the top floor of the hospital felt eerily quiet as Emily stepped inside. Unlike the cold sterility of the other patient rooms, this one was designed for luxury. A spacious layout, dim chandeliers, dark oak furniture, and in the center of it all lay Lucas Grant. Her breath hitched as she took him in. Despite the tubes, the machines keeping him alive, and the stillness of his body, he was handsome. Strong jawline, dark lashes against his pale skin, broad shoulders visible under the hospital gown. If not for the lifeless stillness, he could have easily passed for a man simply sleeping. But this was no ordinary sleep. This was a man trapped in a never-ending silence. Emily swallowed hard and stepped closer, adjusting his foredrip before reaching for the warm cloth prepared for him. She hesitated for just a second before gently pressing it against the skin. The moment she touched him, a strange chill ran through her spine, a sensation she couldn't explain. Like he could feel her there, like somewhere in the depths of his unconsciousness. He knew. A soft beat from the heart monitor filled the silence, steady and rhythmic. Emily shook off the odd feeling and continued her work, carefully wiping his arms, his chest, making sure his body remained clean and cared for. "I guess you don't get a say in this, huh?" she murmured, almost to herself. Silence. "I'll take that as a no." A small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. The days turned into a routine. Every morning and evening, Emily would bathe him, change his sheets, monitor his vitals. But soon it wasn't just about medical care. She found herself talking to him, telling him stories about her day, about the world outside his window. "You should see the cafeteria food. Lucas. It's tragic. Even for a billionaire, I doubt you'd survive it." Silence. "I don't even know why I'm talking to you. Maybe I just like the sound of my own voice." Silence. Silence. Or maybe you're actually listening. The heart monitor beeped as if answering her. And maybe, just maybe, he was... Emily hummed softly as she dipped a clean washcloth into the warm water. The sterile quiet of Lucas's private hospital suite was something she had grown used to over the weeks. The steady beep of the heart monitor, the faint hum of the forward drip, it was all part of the background now. She leaned over the bed, carefully wiping Lucas's face, her fingers gentle but precise. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I read somewhere that people in comas can still hear things. So, technically, you're the worst listener I've ever met." No response. "Of course." She sighed, shaking her head. "It's okay. I'm used to talking to myself now." She moved to clean the curve of his jaw when a slight movement, her breath caught. Had she imagined it? She froze, staring at his hand. Nothing. The fingers lay motionless against the crisp white sheets. Emily let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Great, now I'm hallucinating. Maybe I'm the one who needs a hospital bed." But the unease lingered, and over the next few days, it happened again. The second time she was adjusting his pillow. She wasn't looking when she felt it. The faintest pressure against her wrist. Her head snapped down. Lucas's hand had shifted, only by a fraction of an inch, but enough to make her stomach flip. "Lucas," she whispered, hardly realizing she had said his name. Silence. The same rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the monitor. She placed her hand over his, feeling his warmth, his stillness, his potential movement. Nothing. Was she imagining things, or was something changing? Emily couldn't shake the feeling, so she reported it to Dr. Thompson. He moved. The doctor arched a skeptical brow. "I think so," Emily admitted. "At first, I thought I imagined it, but it keeps happening." His fingers twitch. His hand shifts slightly. It's small, but it's there. Dr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "We'll run tests," he finally said. "But don't get your hopes up too high, Emily. It could just be reflexive muscle spasms." Emily nodded, but deep down, she didn't believe that. She felt something happening. And when the test results came back, she wasn't surprised. "There's increased brain activity," Dr. Thompson told her. "His neurological responses are stronger than before." Her heart leaped. "So he's waking up." Dr. Thompson hesitated. "Not necessarily. It could mean anything, but it's a good sign." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was enough. That night, as she sat beside his bed, Emily found herself talking to Lucas more than usual. "I don't know if you can hear me, but something tells me you can," she murmured. She glanced at his face, at his strong features, still unmoving. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in the room. So she talked. She told him about her day, about the patients who frustrated her, about the rude doctor on the third floor who always stole her coffee. She told him about her childhood, about the small town she grew up in, about how she always dreamed of being a nurse. And as she spoke, she didn't realize that deep in the silence of his coma, Lucas was listening. The morning sun filtered to the hospital room's large windows, casting a warm glow on Lucas Grant's motionless form. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady and rhythmic, just like it had been for the past year. Emily stood beside the bed, rolling up her sleeves. This was just another day, another routine bath, another round of talking to someone who might never answer her. She dipped a warm cloth into the basin, wrung it out, and began gently wiping Lucas's chest, her movements precise and careful. "You know, Lucas," she murmured, smiling faintly, "I was thinking about getting a dog. I need someone to listen to me who won't just lie there and ignore me all day." Silence. She sighed. "Okay, Rude. I was just making conversation." She reached for his arm, running the cloth over his skin, her fingers brushing against his wrist. And then his fingers tightened around her wrist. Emily froze. A sharp breath caught in her throat as she stared at his hand. The pressure was gentle, weak, hesitant, but it was undeniably there. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her heart pounded violently, her pulse roaring in her ears. She wanted to believe it was just another reflex, just another meaningless twitch. But it wasn't, because then Lucas's eyes snapped open. For a moment, Emily couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She had spent months staring at those closed eyelids, watching for any sign of movement. any flicker of life. And now, those deep blue eyes were looking right at her. They were confused, unfocused, vulnerable, but alive. Lucas's dry lips parted. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it was real. What happened? Emily's entire body tensed. Her knees almost buckled, her breath caught between disbelief and sheer panic. He spoke. He woke up. The impossible had just happened. She barely registered the basin of water slipping from her grip, splashing onto the pristine white floor as she stumbled backward. "Oh my God," she repeated, her voice trembling. Her instincts kicked in. She turned and slammed her hand against the emergency button on the wall. A loud alarm blared through the hallway. Seconds later, the door burst open, and a team of doctors and nurses rushed in, led by Dr. Thompson. "What happened?" Dr. Thompson demanded as he moved to the bedside, already checking Lucas's vitals. Emily's voice shook. He grabbed my hand. He opened his eyes. She looked back at Lucas, still unable to believe what she was seeing. His chest rose and fell shakily, his eyes darting around the room as if trying to piece together where he was. He wasn't fully aware. Not yet. But he was here. Dr. Thompson's expression turned from shock to action. "Get me a neurological team now." Nurses scrambled, voices overlapping in disbelief as they hurried to perform tests. The room was a whirlwind of motion, but Emily couldn't take her eyes off Lucas. Then, as if feeling her gaze, his eyes found hers again. And this time, he didn't look away. Everything was happening so fast. The doctors were asking him questions, shining lights into his pupils, testing his motor functions. But through it all, Lucas's gaze kept drifting back to Emily. She stepped forward hesitantly, swallowing hard. "Lucas," she whispered, "do you remember anything?" He stared at her, blinking slowly. A long silence stretched between them. Then his fingers twitched again, and before she could react, he reached for her hand. Weakly, slowly, but deliberately, his hand closed around hers, his grip fragile yet firm, as if he had always known her. Emily's breath hitched. Dr. Thompson looked up sharply. "Lucas, do you know who she is?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. His brows furrowed, his gaze never leaving Emily's. "I don't know," he murmured, his voice rough from months of disuse. "But I feel like I should." A chill ran down Emily's spine. Because even though Lucas Grant didn't remember her, something deep inside him did. The days after Lucas's miraculous awakening were filled with tests, therapy, and endless questions. Doctors were amazed by his recovery. Physically, he was weak, but improving. His muscles, stiff from a year of immobility, were regaining strength through rehabilitation. But mentally, that was another story. Lucas couldn't remember anything about the accident, and the more they pressed him for details, the more frustrated he became. "Lucas, let's try again," Dr. Thompson said during one of their sessions. "What's the last thing you remember?" Lucas rubbed his temples, his expression tense. I don't know. Anything. Where you were. What you were doing." Lucas exhaled sharply. "I told you. It's just pieces, flashes. Tell me about them." A long silence. Then Lucas closed his eyes, his brows furrowing. "I remember feeling," he said, his voice slow, uncertain, "like something was wrong, like I was in danger." Emily, who had been listening quietly from the side, stiffened. Lucas continued, his fingers clenching. There was a road, headlights, and then nothing, just black. Dr. Thompson sighed. "It's common for trauma victims to block out painful memories. It may come back on its own, but for now, we focus on recovery." Lucas nodded, but Emily could see the frustration in his clenched jaw. And deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, unable to stop thinking about it, Emily went to the hospital archives. She had read Lucas's file before, but this time she went through every detail with fresh eyes. And that's when she saw it. Something she had missed before. The report from the incident reconstruction team stated that Lucas's brakes had failed. Failed. Not worn out. Not malfunctioned. Tampered. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't just an unfortunate crash. Someone had wanted Lucas dead, and he had no idea. Taking a shaky breath, She closed the file. She needed to tell him, because if someone had tried to kill him once, they might try again. Lucas's recovery was happening at a remarkable speed. In just a few weeks, he had gone from being bedridden to sitting up, eating on his own, and speaking in full sentences. Now, with the help of physical therapy, he was learning to walk again. And through it all, Emily was there. Every step, every struggle, every frustrating moment where he wanted to give up, she pulled him back. "I can't do this," Lucas muttered, gripping the parallel bars tightly as he attempted to lift himself. "Yes, you can," Emily said firmly, standing beside him. "You've already come this far, Lucas. Don't stop now." He turned to look at her, his breathing heavy. She wasn't just saying words to motivate him. She truly believed in him, and that made him believe in himself. With a determined exhale, he took another step forward. Emily's face lit up. "That's it." For the first time since waking up, Lucas smiled, not out of politeness, not out of obligation, but because, for the first time, he knew exactly who to thank for that. Emily wasn't like the others. She didn't treat him like a charity case. She didn't see him as a billionaire trapped in a hospital bed. She saw him, just Lucas, and that was why he found himself gravitating toward her. Whenever she was in the room, the world felt lighter. Whenever she spoke, her voice pulled him from the darkness that still lingered in his mind. And whenever she touched him, a hand on his arm, steadying him as he walked, adjusting his pillow, his skin tingled with something he couldn't explain. One night, after a particularly long therapy session, Emily suggested taking a walk in the hospital's garden. "Fresh air might do some good," she said, smiling. Lucas agreed, but what he didn't expect was how different everything would feel outside those hospital walls. The cool night air, the rustling trees, the moon casting a soft glow over the world. For the first time, he felt like a person again, not a patient, not a mystery with missing memories, just himself. And beside him, Emily. They walked slowly, Emily holding onto his arm for support. At first, Lucas thought it was just part of her job. But then, he saw the way her fingers lingered on his wrist, the way she glanced at him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way her breath hitched slightly whenever he stepped too close. And suddenly he knew. She felt it, too. That pull, that unspoken connection between them. They stopped near a small stone bench, the moonlight casting shadows across the garden. Lucas turned to face her, his heart beat, unsteady for a different reason this time. Emily opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, Lucas took her hand, her lips parted in surprise, her eyes searching his. "I don't remember anything about my life before this," he admitted, his voice low. "But I know one thing." Emily swallowed. "What?" He tightened his grip around her fingers. "I trust you." The words were simple, but to him, they meant everything. And judging by the way Emily's breath caught in her throat, the way her cheeks flushed under the moonlight, the way she didn't pull away, she understood. And for now, that was enough. The night was restless. Lucas tossed and turned in his hospital bed. His body was still weak, but his mind was racing. And then a flash. A sudden burst of memory crashed through his subconscious like a breaking dam. The road was dark. The rain poured against the windshield, his wipers struggling to keep up. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind still clouded from the meeting he had just left. Something felt off. Then, out of nowhere, headlights bright, rushing toward him. A black SUV swerved into his lane at full speed. Lucas yanked the wheel, his tires skidding on the slick pavement. The brakes! They didn't work. Lucas gasped, his heart pounding as he desperately tried to regain control. Just before impact, his eyes darted to the side of the road. A shadowy figure stood there, watching, and then blackness. Lucas's eyes snapped open, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. His pulse raced, sweat clinging to his skin. The memory had been so vivid, so real, and now he knew the truth. This was an accident. Someone had tried to kill him. Emily noticed something was wrong the moment she walked into his room the next morning. He was different. His usual calm demeanor was gone. His body was tense, his hands clenched into fists. "Lucas," she asked carefully, "what's wrong?" His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, filled with new intensity. "I remember something." Emily's stomach dropped. "The accident?" He gave a stiff nod. "It wasn't an accident, Emily. Someone tampered with my brakes. And there was a man standing on the side of the road, just watching as my car crashed." Emily felt chills run down her spine. Everything she had suspected, he had just confirmed it. But the question remained, who and why? Over the next few days, Emily and Lucas dug deeper, going through Lucas's files, company records, and anything that could hint at someone wanting him gone. Then, finally, they found it. A financial transfer, a large sum of money, wired just days before the accident. The recipient? A known criminal with a history of orchestrating stage crashes. And the sender? Daniel Grant, Lucas's half-brother. The realization hit like a ton of bricks. "It was him," Lucas whispered, gripping the edge of the table. Daniel had always been jealous, always felt like Lucas was a favorite, the one who inherited their father's legacy while he was left in the shadows. And now, he had tried to erase Lucas completely. Emily felt her chest tighten. "Lucas, he wanted you dead." Lucas's jaw tightened. "And now, I'm going to make sure he pays." That evening, Lucas and Emily arranged to meet Daniel face to face. In a dimly lit study inside the Grant estate, Daniel lounged in a leather chair, swirling a glass of whiskey as Lucas and Emily entered. Well, Daniel smirked. "The dead man walks." Lucas's eyes burned with fury. "Why did you do it, Daniel?" Daniel took a slow sip of his drink. "You already know why." Emily stepped forward. "You tried to kill your own brother. For what? Money? Power?" Daniel's smirk faded. "For everything that should have been mine," he spat. "You were always the golden child, the heir, the one who got everything handed to him. Well, guess what? I was tired of waiting for my turn." Lucas's hands curled into fists. "So you hired someone to sabotage my car." Daniel laughed coldly. "I didn't think you'd survive. But hey, miracles happen, right?" Emily felt rage boiling inside her. But before she could say anything, the door burst open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside. "Daniel Grant," one officer announced. "You're under arrest for attempted murder." Daniel whipped around to Lucas, his expression twisting into panic. "You set me up." Lucas tilted his head. "No, brother, you set yourself up." Daniel was dragged away in handcuffs, screaming empty threats. And as the door slammed shut behind him, a heavy silence filled the room. Lucas finally exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time since waking up. It was over. Justice had been served, and he was finally free. The Grant estate had always been grand, imposing, and cold, a fortress of wealth built on generations of power. But tonight, as Emily stepped inside the dimly lit dining hall, it felt different, warmer, more intimate. Soft candlelight flickered across the elegantly set table near the large glass windows overlooking the city skyline. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, and a bottle of wine sat chilling beside two perfectly placed plates. Emily's breath caught. "Lucas, what is all this?" she asked, turning to face him. Lucas stood behind her, his hands tucked into his pockets, his blue eyes soft yet intense. "Dinner," he said simply. "Just you and me?" Emily's chest tightened. For the past few weeks, their lives have been a whirlwind. From his recovery to unraveling the truth about his accident to seeing his brother arrested. But now, with the storm finally behind them, there was only this moment. And somehow, that felt even scarier. As they sat down, Emily couldn't ignore the way Lucas watched her, like he was memorizing every detail, like she was something fragile yet precious. "You're quiet," she said, giving him a small teasing smile. "That's not like you." He exhaled, swirling his wine glass between his fingers. "I've been thinking." "That's even more dangerous," she joked. He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his gaze burning into hers. "Emily, do you know how many people walked away from me while I was in that coma?" Her smile faded. 2. She knew. She had seen it firsthand. The way his family had treated him like a burden, the way his so-called friends had moved on, The only reason he had survived that darkness was because someone stayed, because she stayed. But you didn't, Lucas murmured. You were there, day after day. You took care of me when I couldn't even open my eyes. When I was nothing but a lost cause to everyone else, you refused to give up on me. Emily's throat tightened. She had never thought about it that way. She had just done what she felt was right. But to Lucas, it had meant everything. Lucas leaned closer, his fingers brushing against hers on the table. Emily, I have everything. His voice was soft but firm. Money, power, influence. But none of it means anything without you. Emily's breath hitched. Lucas, let me finish, she whispered. His hand finally closed around hers, his thumb tracing slow, delicate circles against her skin. I don't know how it happened. I don't know when it started. But what I do know is that every moment I was trapped in that coma, you were the one keeping me alive. You were my light in the dark. Emily, her eyes burned with tears. I love you. The words crashed into her, stealing the breath from her lungs. Not because she hadn't felt it too, but because hearing it from him made it undeniably real. Lucas Grant, the man who had once lived in a world of cold calculations, business deals, and power plays, was now sitting across from her, bearing his soul. And for the first time in her life, Emily felt something she had never felt before, truly, completely, irrevocably cherished. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she smiled through them. Lucas, she whispered, you have no idea how much that means to me. He reached up, gently wiping a tear from her face. Then let me show you. And as he leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers, Emily knew this was only the beginning. Months had passed since that fateful night when Lucas confessed his love for Emily. And in that time, everything had changed. Lucas had fully recovered, regaining his strength through endless hours of rehabilitation and training. His body was no longer weak, no longer held back by the accident that nearly took his life. And now, he was Lucas Grant once more, back at the helm of Grant Enterprises, standing in the boardroom with the confidence of a man who had been to hell and back, and survived. But there was one crucial difference between the man he was before the accident and the man standing here now. This time, he wasn't alone. This time, he had Emily. And soon, if she said yes, she would be his forever. The rooftop of the Grant estate was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, casting warm golden hues across the city skyline. Emily stood at the edge, gazing at the breathtaking view, completely unaware of what was about to happen. It's beautiful up here, she murmured, the breeze gently playing with her hair. Lucas, standing behind her, smiled. Not as beautiful as you. She turned to him, rolling her eyes playfully. Smooth, very smooth. But her teasing expression faded when she saw the way he was looking at her. There was something different in his eyes tonight. Something deeper, more certain, more infinite. Before she could ask, he took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he dropped to one knee. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hands flew to her mouth as Lucas pulled out a small velvet box, flipping it open to reveal the most stunning engagement ring she had ever seen, an elegant diamond set in a delicate platinum band. But it wasn't the ring that took her breath away. It was him. It was the way his voice trembled slightly as he whispered, Emily, you didn't just save my life. You became my life. Her heart pounded. Before you, I had everything. Money, power, success. But I was missing something. I was missing you. Tears welled in her eyes. You're the reason I fought to live. The reason I found myself again. And now, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know just how much you mean to me. He held the ring up, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily Monroe, will you marry me? The world stood still. Emily couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All she could do was nod frantically, laughter and tears spilling over at the same time. Yes, she finally managed, her voice breaking. Yes, Lucas. 1,000 times yes. Lucas let out a breath of relief, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, into his world, into forever. And as their lips met under the fading sunlight, Emily knew this was where she belonged. Always. The Grant estate had never looked more radiant than on their wedding day. The gardens were transformed into an enchanting wonderland. White roses lined the pathways. Twinkling lights draped the towering oak trees, and soft music played in the background as guests gathered in awe. Emily stood at the grand entrance, dressed in an elegant white gown, her heart racing. "Are you ready?" Lisa, her maid of honor, whispered beside her. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her bouquet. Then she looked up, and there he was. Lucas stood at the altar, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, looking at her as if she was the only person in the universe. Her nerves vanished. She stepped forward, walking down the aisle with absolute certainty. Each step brought her closer to forever. And when she finally reached him, Lucas took her hands in his eyes shining with pure, unfiltered love. The vows were spoken, their promises sealed not just in words, but in the unbreakable bond they had built through every hardship, every battle, every moment of unwavering devotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." A cheer erupted as Lucas cupped her face, pressing the most heartfelt, most meaningful kiss against her lips. And as the world rejoiced, Emily realized this wasn't the end of their story. This was only the beginning. As the sun began to set, Lucas and Emily slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to the gardens, basking in their new reality. No more hospitals, no more loneliness, no more pain, just them, together, always. Lucas squeezed her hand gently. "You know," he murmured, "I thought I had everything before I met you." Emily smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. And now, he looked down at her, his expression soft, devoted, endless. "Now, I know that nothing I had before matters, because you are the greatest thing that's ever happened to me." Emily blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the depth of his words. And as they stepped forward toward the golden glow of the setting sun, she knew. They had been through storms, darkness, near-death experiences. But in the end, love had won. And with Lucas by her side, Emily was finally home. As Lucas and Emily walked hand in hand into their happily ever after, their story became a testament to something truly powerful. Love is not just about finding someone, but about standing by them through every storm. Emily never gave up on Lucas, even when the world had. And in the end, it was love, not money or power, that truly saved him. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Story for more emotional and inspiring tales. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that will move your soul. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. See you in the next story.